All right, Lark Dean Galley, thanks for joining me and being here.
My pleasure. Thank you, Dalton, for reaching out.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think where I want to start, learning to breathe again, choosing to heal after losing a loved one to suicide. That's a deep topic. And I think one that affects Utah quite a bit, right?
Exactly. And you're actually holding one of my first official copies, so I'm
feel
happy
honored
to get that. Yes. I took some different insights from people, asked them, what they thought about different titles that I had come up with, and that's the one that sort of was chosen by the group. And it comes across in a couple different ways. First of all, learning to breathe again, because having been affected by first my father's suicide, and then 5 years later, my 19-year-old son's suicide, and that was just 19 months ago.
Wow.
Everything felt heavy. You say, what's the hardest part about a suicide or losing someone? And it's like, well, there's no one thing. It's like just everything in your life hurts and it's hard. Even breathing, like it was hard to even take a breath. Sometimes you'd forget to breathe. And so it's like learning to breathe again, learning to do the things that you take for granted, learning to just make it through the mundane. That's hard. And then the second part about choosing to heal after losing a loved one.
I like that title.
Choosing.
Yeah.
And that's what it was. It was a decision. It was a choice. It was an active choice I made to say, I need to find some purpose and meaning in this terrible situation. Choosing to heal, because as I started to get on different Facebook groups and associate with other parents who had lost their children, they were stuck. Most of them were stuck. Their child could have died 20 years ago. Or one mother's child died 3 years ago. She still had the child's backpack on the stairway where the child left it. And I thought, I do not want to be stuck in that place where I just spin and spin and spin. What can I do? How can I make a difference? And it was just by accepting a mission for my life and totally changing the direction of what I was doing to take on this suicide prevention platform. And honestly, 19 months ago, if you had said, Lark, you're going to be on my podcast and we're going to talk about suicide prevention, I was in Dalton. No chance.
Yeah, right.
No chance.
Wow.
And
right. Even though your father had died by suicide.
Especially my father, because what happened, I couldn't talk about it. He was first in a car accident, which then precipitated him taking out a gun and shooting himself, which is what ended his life. I couldn't say that last part. I had close friends who didn't know how he actually died because I couldn't say it because the stigma and the shame around suicide. And then when my son died by suicide, I started to go there and I started to feel that dark hole opening up like I was in for 5 months after my father died. I was in a depression. I don't remember those 5 months.
Wow.
And when my son died, I just started thinking, I want to crawl into a hole. I want to hide. I don't want to talk. And yet I was looking at the rest of my family, realizing that they were struggling, and I didn't have the luxury of going into a hole for 5 months or 5 years. Because when I came out, they might not be there.
Yeah.
And that was a hard decision to make. But it wasn't easy, but I knew I had to do it.
Yeah. And by doing it, you mean like choosing to move on and choosing to, and just accept, right, that what is going on is happening, and you can either, like you said, you can either, deal with it one way, or you can pick up and move on and just go and make a difference.
Right. Well, I just noticed that when I get down, it's because I start thinking thoughts about what could have been. What if he didn't die? Okay, so I have to stop myself there and say, okay, that's crazy talk because we can't change it. Do I regret it? Do I wish it could be different? Yes.
Yeah.
But for me to say, what if he didn't?
Right.
That's when I start to spin and go into a black hole. And so as much as sometimes I want to go down that rabbit hole or I want to fantasize, I have to stop myself. And that's how I can stay positive in the sense that, like, let's talk about how we can change things for the future.
Yeah, and change things for the future for your family, because I know I think, at least I heard on a podcast, I think you have more than one child.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
And so you got to be strong for them.
Exactly.
And for your family.
You know what? And we were all going through different stages of grief where I had a daughter that could talk about it, and then I had another daughter who would leave the room if I started to talk about it. And we were just struggling in our different ways, trying to cope as best we could. and it's been a rough patch.
Yeah, I can only imagine that, especially for youth, adolescents. Like, dealing with death is not something that they teach in school or that you talk about very often.
And
right?
it's just heavy, and
yeah, it is.
Death is hard enough, let alone losing someone by suicide.
Yeah.
Because you think it really could have been different, or
Sure,
why wasn't I
sure.
enough to help this person move forward? Why didn't I see the signs? Why didn't I know? All
those are
these
tough questions.
Yes,
Yeah, those are tough. How did you deal with those?
Oh, it was really hard. And
Yeah.
at first, because my relationship with my son was so volatile. I mean, he was a brilliant kid.
Yeah.
He argued with me every day of his life. And, as a parent, it was so frustrating. I just trying to help you, and trying to teach you life skills. And so it was frustrating for me. And the first few days after he passed on, I just thought, he hates me. I was not a good mom. I wish I could have done something different. Why did our relationship have to be this way? And so many regrets. And I had a few people the first week that he passed away that came to me and said, your son has a message for you. And I'm thinking, okay, like this is kind of weird, but all right, I'll listen. Three different people in that 1 week said, tell my mom that I love her.
Yeah. Wow.
And I knew that message was for me. And I knew that he was not in the same state of mind that he was when he passed away, where we were, arguing every day.
Yeah.
And that he had moved to a place where he could see that how I tried to parent was because I loved him. And this is going to sound weird, but I actually feel closer to him now. I enjoy sharing his story because then he and I can be close. And I feel that he wants people to know, make a different choice. Your life matters, and you have something to contribute on this earth. And if you choose to end your life early, you're going to miss out on so much, especially being there for the people that need and love you. Yeah,
well, I don't think that's weird at all, because before we were talking in the other, before the podcast, I've lost loved ones to suicide. My wife's cousin, that was probably a big one, but it was, I've heard that same thing, like dealing with it helps people be closer with them, and they feel that, right? And so it's just an amazing story, like being strong like that, being able to keep going and really, and tell people, right? Because I think that if you have a story, that you should tell it and share it. And because it just helps people. Like, that's awareness is a big deal.
Well, I found that the more I started to share it and open up and be very, just like, let's remove the stigma, let's talk about it, that people would feel then comfortable and able to talk to me and say, I was hurting, I attempted suicide, or I've been thinking about it. And it helps people to understand when we talk about it that they're not the only one that is hurting. I think we all hurt in different ways.
Yeah.
And if we isolate and we don't talk about it, then we're over here in a corner thinking nobody else understands me, nobody's feeling what I'm feeling, which is exactly the opposite of the truth.
Right. Well, and that's a dangerous one too. A lot of people get sucked into that one, that like, I'm the only one, like no one knows how I'm feeling and kind of thing. And I think we've all experienced that. And that's a tough one to get out of too. Like, because it's so unique, like each experience is so unique, but what's not unique is the empathy that we get from each other. You know what I mean? And how we can, our stories are very different, but I feel the same. You know what I mean?
Right.
Those feelings.
Right. I mean, we're all human and we all experience grief and loss and pain. And if we can be more empathetic and kinder to each other. Yeah. And I feel like one of the lessons that my son taught me was to have that empathy. I was a very action oriented, just get it done, do these tasks and we'll be fine, and not no hugs, don't even touch me, don't look at me type person. Yeah. And now I slow down. I take the time to really see people, to really understand, what might they be going through, and how can I help them see the beauty in themselves and see that they matter. Yeah. And that's huge.
That is huge. I think that we were talking about this before too. Like I was a counselor in the crisis text line, and they told it, like when we were being trained specifically, it was like, we do not solve problems, we just listen. And I was like, and I'm a dude, right? And dudes like to fix things, you know what I mean? And for the most part, like generalizing, obviously, but that was true for me. I just fix things. And they would tell us like, no, just don't fix anything. Just listen to them, use, active listening. And I realized that more people were helped with just that than any advice I could have given anybody.
Exactly, because that's what we're all looking for, is just to be heard, right? I was so fortunate to meet and interact with Richard Paul Evans, who was kind enough to write the foreword to my book. And when I met him and we had a chance to have a real in-depth conversation, the thing I remember about him is that he just listened. He didn't try to solve anything or give me a bunch of to-dos. He just listened. And he has a foundation, the Christmas Box House, that has helped 125,000 children.
Wow.
And just to improve their lives and try to have a stable, safe place to be when their home life is awful. And he has set up these angels, from the Christmas Box, the book that he wrote originally for grieving parents to go to. So he's had a lot of experiences where he's interacted with people who are in grief.
Yeah.
And I just remember coming away from our conversation, which I have to say was more one-sided.
Sure.
But he just listened, and I felt heard and seen.
Yeah. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that anybody can do, especially when you're talking about and now that we've been talking a little bit, learning to breathe again, that's such an excellent title, because it really is like it, when you lose somebody, it's tough. That's really hard. And even losing somebody or betrayal or things like that, it can feel really heavy. I know I listened to one podcast where you talked about that a little bit, your first husband,
right? I mean, there's a lot of grief. We experience grief as humans throughout our life. And like you referenced, my first husband left me 6 months pregnant, and literally he disappeared. He left the country.
Wow.
Right. And this was before cell phones. I mean, you talk
what
about a crazy life,
Yeah,
and
no kidding.
I read a book about something like that where, it was fiction. And I'm like, oh no, my life is even crazier than that, which you can't even believe. So it's, these things happen in our lives, whether it was back in high school where maybe you broke up with a girlfriend or boyfriend, or moving, even good things like graduating from high school or college, or getting a new job and moving to a new state. Sometimes there's some grief in that because you're leaving something behind. And so if we can acknowledge that there's grief and see that and be able to say, okay, what can I do, acknowledge this grief and be able to then learn and move forward, because it's really hard to move forward if we don't acknowledge the grief in the past. Like talking about my son's death and talking about my father's death has allowed me to heal, when shutting out my father's death and not talking about it didn't let me heal.
Yeah. And it's amazing how just talking can help you heal, and help you work through things, because when you're in your head, if it always seems a little bit bigger than it is. Not to say that these things aren't big, but I've just noticed that. Like once I start talking about it, I'm like, okay, I can deal with it. These are things, as I'm listening to myself talk, I can deal with these things. I can work through these things.
Well, especially if you're sharing with someone else, you don't feel like you're carrying the burden all alone.
Oh yeah,
right? Seriously,
for sure. So I mean, and let me ask you this, because I actually had the opportunity to finish a book last week called The Gift of Forgiveness, and there was a couple stories in there. And it's by Katie Schwarzenegger. But there's a couple stories in there where there's been deaths by suicide. And she talks about forgiveness as one of them. And did you ever experience anything like that, forgiveness or anything?
Well, I will tell you, the first week after he died, I was so angry with him. So angry.
Wow.
I did not cry for the first week when my son died. My husband, military, right?
Yeah.
He cried for 3 days.
Wow.
And I've never really seen him cry before. And for me, I just shut off all the feelings, and I was so angry. And it wasn't until a week after he died that I saw a picture of him as a little boy. And then I just broke down and sobbed. And through some processing and realizing that he wasn't in his right mind, we need to look at people who die by suicide with compassion.
Yeah.
Because they have overcome this innate desire to preserve their life. right?
Yeah.
And they're thinking, I'm a burden to my family. I should just end it all. I'm causing problems. They're not in their right minds. And when I could come to understand that he wasn't thinking straight, that if he were making another choice now and he wasn't under pressure and feeling all of this depression, he would have made a different choice. And it was through that I could say, I understand you. I understand, why you were feeling this way. And I don't even know that I would say forgive more that that I understand, because I don't know that I'm in a, I had to forgive myself maybe for some things that I felt I did not do as well as a parent. Regrets, right?
Yeah,
Regrets.
Yeah. So you had to go through some of those things.
Yes.
Well, and so I think forgiveness is a weird word, right? Because, and a weird concept,
right?
Because it's not, if it exists, and I get in trouble for this sometimes, but if it exists, it's only a gift, and it's only a gift to us, right? But I just hadn't remembered reading about some of those things, and I was like, it's kind of interesting. But they didn't use the word forgiveness a lot in the book. They mostly used the words you've already said and that we've been talking about. They experienced gratitude, they experienced compassion, they experienced empathy, they experienced service. They were like, okay, how can I help other people from, maybe I can prevent something, or maybe I can help somebody else cope, and things like that. So I think that's beautiful. I think it's really important. But now, is this the first book you've wrote?
Yes.
Wow.
I had always wanted to be an author, but I will tell you that the first book that I thought about writing was completely different. It was going to be a parenting book, and it was going to talk about how strict you needed to be with your children, and how you needed to raise them a specific way. And I laugh now because everything I thought I knew about parenting I've thrown out.
Oh, no kidding.
Yes. And I change, and I parent in a different way.
Wow.
I believe that as parents, we are here to love and guide our children. We are not their boss. We are not in charge of them. We are not their dictator. And we get so caught up in this, well, if they don't do X, Y, Z, or if they don't graduate from high school, or they don't go on to college, or if they don't become a doctor, or they don't walk this path, then they've failed, or then I have failed as a parent.
Oh, yeah, that's even harder.
And it gets wrapped up, and it's really messed up. And so if we just step back and take away our ego from the equation and say, I am here to love and guide you. So, for example, let's say that your child comes to you and says, hey, I got my girlfriend pregnant. Or,
right.
Dad, I'm gay.
Yeah.
How are we as parents going to deal with that?
Yeah. What's so funny is I have 2 little babies that you saw before we came here. And my wife and I talk about that all the time. And I think our answers came from, because I'm similar. You know what I mean? We've already had the conversation. And so it's not that, because I stopped using the word raise children. Like like I'm from Iowa, like you raise cattle and you raise sheep. You know what I mean? You don't raise kids. Yeah, you help them grow, and you try to guide them as much as they can. Because I'll tell you, like when I first became a parent, and I'm sure you felt the same way, but they're so different. And even my son and my daughter, they're so different from even each other. And I don't feel like we've changed a whole lot in the way we parented. They're just so different, and they're so different from me. And they're just their own person. So yes. I feel that. Mm-hmm. I feel that.
And so as I've understood this a little bit better, I have two daughters and another son, older son. The daughters, one is 24 and the other one is almost 20.
Okay.
So just a couple weeks ago, she came home and showed her dad and me, and she still lives at home. She's 19, still lives at home. Showed her dad and me this lovely tattoo that she got, that she was so proud of. And I will tell you, 2 years ago, it might not have gone well, right?
Sure,
I would have been upset because I don't choose to put tattoos on my body. Sure. And I just looked at her and I said, well, dear, you love hiking in the mountains. That's so nice that you were able to get a tattoo of the mountains on the side of your foot, right?
Yeah.
And I looked inside and I realized I didn't have any negative feelings, any anger. It was very different, because sometimes we can say things like, oh, that's nice, but
not mean it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but not mean it.
And I just realized there was no negative emotion there.
Yeah.
I could just say, good for you, right?
Yeah. And where do you think those feelings came from for you?
Because I realized that my relationship with my daughter and her being there is more important than anything that she could do, say, be.
Yeah.
That doesn't matter.
That's such a beautiful thing, because you're right. Like I would think the same thing. There's some things that are more important, and if it, for me, if it doesn't affect, it's almost like if it doesn't affect like our safety or our rights or something, then like,
What does it matter?
yeah, there's something deeper.
Back in 2007, my husband came home from Afghanistan.
Okay.
And he had a different perspective on life, right? I mean, he had been through 18 months of in-country, out on the lines. Like he was
Scary,
embedded
yeah.
with the
Wow.
Afghans out, not even, in a camp, in a
Not even-
secure camp.
yeah.
Yeah, he was out. And he came home and his philosophy was, if somebody isn't dying today, it's a good day.
Wow.
And when you take on that kind of perspective where let's really look at this, is a bad grade in the scheme of life, does it really matter? Or does
Right.
that fender bender, does it really matter? Those kinds of things. And at first I was a little upset with him because I thought, well, yes, these things matter. Life is serious, we have to be.
Yeah.
And now that my son has passed on, I look at stuff differently. And I just, a few weeks after my son passed on, I was in this kind of coaching group and we were kind of talking, and one of the women was complaining that she had been in a fender bender and she was so upset because it's going to cost several hundreds of dollars and she didn't have it, and she was just going on. And I tried to very gently say, in the scheme of things, it's really not that important.
Yeah.
And that's the way I view my life now.
Yeah. Well, there's no reason to get upset because I think, to add to what you're saying too, is like, and there's nothing you can do about it. So there's some things you just can't control, and to get upset about things you can't control really puts you in a
Exactly.
But I like your shift because I got my bachelor's degree in accounting, and I know you got your master's in economics,
Mm-hmm.
right? And worked for corporations, and I've done the same thing. And that mindset really follows you. I mean, it's that kind of like economics, accounting, that business, that like, right? Like I don't
Black and white.
Like excuses don't pay the bills, right? Like,
yes. Get out there and do it.
Yeah, it's right. That's right. There's yeah, exactly. And so I feel like that's really cool. And are you still involved with all that?
Oh yes. So I have
Okay.
a couple of businesses.
Okay, yeah.
So I have a small trucking company that I've streamlined and just set up so that
Wow.
I don't really spend a lot of time with it.
Cool, yeah.
It's running well. And then I started doing business coaching, entrepreneurs, that type of thing. And what was really interesting to me is a lot of these, what I would call great, high-power, successful entrepreneurs, they would accomplish something, and I would say, okay, let's move on to your next goal. And we'd talk about what the goal was, and they would often say, I don't think I'm good enough to do that. I don't think I can. I'm not the expert. And they would tell me the reasons why they couldn't. And I would ask them, I would say, you just accomplished this huge goal, which is bigger than this one,
Yeah.
And I said, you can do this. And a lot of times, we set ourselves up and we think we can't do something that we really can, or we don't value ourselves. And I realized when my son passed on that it wasn't just, superstar entrepreneurs. It's everybody has these questions about their value. Am I good enough? Do I matter?
Yeah.
Everybody has that.
Yeah, and that's a tough one to overcome too, especially for entrepreneurs, because because entrepreneurship isn't fun for the most part. It's
It's crazy. Like, what are we thinking?
It can pay off. It has a lot of payoff, but it's not a very fun path. Especially,
Yep.
and so you can get down on yourself real quick.
Exactly,
You know
because
what
you
I mean?
think, it's not working or it is working.
Yeah.
It's this roller coaster with
Yeah.
being an entrepreneur. And I would say that, this year with COVID, some businesses are doing really well because of COVID, just because, their services are more in demand. Some people are going out of business
Yeah,
because they don't have any
seriously.
customers. Some
Yeah.
people have been successful at shifting what they do, and some people have not been successful, and I've seen it across the board.
Yeah,
And that's the one thing is sometimes you feel like you want to pack it in some days, right?
For sure.
And I'm just going to go get a 9 to 5 and get a steady paycheck. But
yeah.
but there's not necessarily security there either, right?
No, there's not. I tell people that all the time.
Yeah.
Like if you're in a reset like 08 or even now, like even 9 to 5 people
Right.
got screwed.
Hmm. They don't know
And you
if they
thought
really
you-
have a job.
You thought you had security, and one day they downsized or decided to furlough or lay off, and now you don't have anything. And
Exactly.
you know what I mean? And so I think there's that bittersweetness, right? Like, I'm an entrepreneur, so I can figure this out, right? But then there's that, it's just so tough.
I would say it's so important to have a skill set. Anytime you have the opportunity to learn something new,
Amen.
take advantage of that. I look back on my life and I'm like, I have the weirdest, like strangest education and how I was able to learn different skills. And they don't really mesh at all. It's like, why did she do this? And why did she do that?
Yeah.
But now I look and I think I could probably do almost anything except code a computer.
Sure.
You know, because I have no interest in that. But
Sure.
I could probably figure out or do almost anything because I'm willing to learn and I have a varied skill set, which allows me to adapt, which is so important.
Yeah. I tell people that all the time. Like your biggest, I mean, you know, a lot of people will tell you, like, if you're a financial coach, your income's your biggest asset or things like that. My thing is right on line with yours. Like, your skills pay the bills. Mm-hmm. Like if you skills give you the confidence to say, like, if you lose this 9 to 5, I got more skills. I can go pick this up. I can do my own thing. You know, if this entrepreneur is not working, I got skills. I can be a whatever. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
I totally agree with that. Have you seen, like, because you did this before you wrote the book and before these things happened, you know, where you lost your father, you know, you lost your son. But have you seen you've been able to translate the lessons you've learned from these experiences into the business and entrepreneurship coaching and world and things like that?
In a way, I've been spending a lot of time in writing the book and launching the book. And I will say, for aspiring writers, writing the book is just the first part.
Oh, yeah.
You know, marketing it
part.
and getting it out. And it was a very emotional book to write. So it took
Okay.
a lot longer than, you know, my doer. I'm going to do this in 2 weeks, you know,
Yeah.
over a year later.
Oh, wow.
You know,
Well,
it
yeah,
takes,
it's a tough, yeah.
It took a lot longer than I thought, just because I would start and then it would be too much, too heavy, and I'd have to come back to it later. So I would say that in maybe coaching with people or talking to people, I am more understanding of maybe the difficulties they're facing, that type of thing. In the past, if somebody might have said, I'm doing the best I can, my answer would have said, well, your best isn't good enough.
Yeah,
You know?
your best doesn't pay the bills.
Yeah, exactly.
We need results. Yeah, the economics, the account. Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
that really harsh line, right?
Yeah.
And now I'm willing to spend time with people. Let's talk about this. What are the other aspects?
Interesting.
The other thing that I remember early on when my kids were younger, and there were, you know, my son especially, like every day of his life, he knew what buttons to push, right? Just like he was that kid.
Yeah.
And so frustrating. And I look back and I think, isn't it interesting that I thought I could have all of this frustration in my home environment, you know, with my child or with my spouse or whatever, and things weren't good there. And yet I would go out to work and try to win clients and have this frustration would follow me, even though we think that we can separate, you know, our lives.
That's tough.
It follows you. And when I started to work on my home relationships, that's when my business relationships started to improve.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, you know, isn't that interesting?
There's something here. There's something here.
There must be something correlated. So I would just say we think we can hide things from the world, and whether it's conscious or subconscious, we really can't. People pick up on that.
Yeah. Well, I think as a business owner, I think that's so true. Like, you've got to be able to just manage things, right? I've that's a new word in my vocabulary too, is just manage, you know, because it's going to be a bad day, but you've got to be able to manage it. You cope, manage. Like, I'm sure, even, you know, I'm sure even with me, right? Like, there's days where, you know, our family remembers our cousin who passed away by suicide, and it's tough, but you've got to manage that.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And so you use it as a learning lesson and say, what maybe could I have done differently? Maybe I could have reached out or whatever. And how am I going to do that differently in my interactions with people in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I think people, and let me ask you this. You've mentioned that you've kind of switched, like when you talk to people now, the business clients that you've had, I mean, how have those responses been different, like versus, you know, before and now?
So I will talk to people more and maybe delve into some of their home life, you know, like let's talk about this and what's going on there, and really look at the root and find oftentimes it's just that they lack self-confidence or they wonder about their value. So I always try to tell people, what is it that you have learned that makes you different and sets you apart from everybody else? So for example, I was talking with one woman yesterday who's wanting to bring some programs that she's implemented with with her autistic son, and with her husband reads numbers backwards, and so some things that they've learned in their home for these special programs. I'm like, if you want to go into the homeschool community or just to help people with these specific niches, that's where you want to stay. You don't want to say, hey, I'm going out to the whole wide world. Parents, let me help you with your kids.
Good. Yeah, good point.
And what are the lessons that you have learned that, because a lot of times we think that, oh, I know it, so everybody else must know it. And that's not the case, right?
That's so true.
It's like, what comes easy to you, or what have you had to learn because of your situation? That's where you specialize in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think you could be more on point with that, because it's true. It's like, nobody would ever pay for, like business owners, right? Like nobody would ever pay for that. I've been doing that forever. But that's one of the reasons of this podcast. That's what you do. You get on and you're like, I've learned these things, and now I can provide value to people's lives. And sometimes that value pays out in money, right? Or other things, right? But I like that. But most importantly, they learn that, because I interviewed, the owner. He was the co-founder of Mobetta's. And he was like, him and his brother, they were going to start this restaurant, Mobetta's. And he cooks all that stuff at home, right? He's like, I don't know. I mean, like,
so why would anybody want it,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. He's like, but they doubled down, and they really, they Mobetta's now, right? But it's just that. It's just what you're talking about. Like, just because, and it's stuff that, like, before I moved to Utah, because I'm not originally from here, I lived in Iowa, and I'm Hawaiian. And so I ate all of the stuff that he served in my house. Like, my mom makes that. I know how to make that, mac salad, rice, and all that stuff, chicken and stuff. I'm like, I'll still go pay for that, though.
Oh yeah, just for
because
the
even though I can do it, you know what I mean, personally. So I think you're totally right. That's so awesome. So you've been, you're going on a lot of podcasts. You've done it quite a few before, and I'm sure you'll do more, which is great. So what's like the biggest message you want to get out there?
It's especially important to talk about this year with the pandemic and the lockdown, because people are experiencing isolation, and that's the opposite of what we need. We need to engage more with people, like spend time with people.
Yeah.
There are a bunch of billboards coming up in Utah that I've noticed, like, this is what suicide prevention looks like. And it's, a group of friends holding hands or hugging. And I'm like, that's great, but that's not reality for the most part right now, right?
Yeah. You put those billboards up, and then the same people who put the billboards up go into the next office and tell people that
they
6
can't
feet.
get together,
they can't get together or anything.
And so that's what we need to be really aware of, is that, those are the things that help, is to have connection. And it's important. It's really important to be with other people and to spend time with people. And my father was bipolar, and so he wanted to do the opposite. He wanted to isolate, and that's what happens when people are in a depression. They want to isolate, which is exactly the opposite of what they really need to do for their mental health. And suicide attempts are up 30% this year.
That's nuts.
And it has a lot to do with the fear of what's going to happen, the uncertainty, and just the feeling of being isolated. And that's what we need to understand, is like, together we can get through this. And okay, if you don't have your 6-figure job or whatever, let's look at this really in reality and comparison. It could be worse.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Do you have your health? Do you have your family? Are you guys safe? Are you well? We'll get through it. Because the one thing that my husband and I have learned through it all is that things don't matter.
Yeah.
Relationships are the only thing that matters in the end. We look at, okay, we have degrees and we have businesses and we've done all these things, and they don't mean anything to us. The house, the car, whatever it is that you think, oh, I'm going to go for this is my next goal. And that's another thing for me. I've always been goal oriented, and it's stuff for a trip or whatever. And now I'm like, whatever.
Yeah, like it doesn't. Well, I think that's what a lot of people miss. And I learned these principles. I grew up learning very like stoic principles. So like, you can only control what you can control. Memento mori. If you were to leave life right now, how would that dictate what you do, say, and think? Right? Like, what would, if you
What
knew
would you
tomorrow,
change?
yeah, if you knew tomorrow you were going to expire, like what would you do right now? And I was like, man, I wouldn't be doing this.
No.
So then let's figure out. And one of the reasons I started the podcast, because I think a lot of people do that. They're like, well, I wouldn't be right here. I wouldn't be in this 9 to 5. I wouldn't be. And maybe, I've had some people be like, you know what? I listen to your podcast and I don't want to be an entrepreneur. I'm more of like a team player, right? I'm more of a linchpin guy.
Uh-huh.
I don't want to come up with the ideas. I want to make the ideas happen. And I'm like,
that's okay
right on,
too.
man. Way to go. And so giving people the opportunity to realize that, what you said was awesome. Like that your skills that you already have and that you can develop on your own can be ways to make you happy.
Exactly.
So
the other thing I think about with my father's death and suicide and my son, I always am conscious of when I leave someone, it could be the last time I see them. And what do I want them to remember about what I say to them?
Yeah.
When somebody leaves, is that an angry word that I have? And so I've really, especially with your family, sometimes, you get teenagers that slams the door, whatever.
19-year-olds come home with tattoos, right?
You're like, wow, beautiful, dear.
Yeah.
And you just have to realize, is that the last thing I want them to remember that I said?
Right.
And so that's shifted my focus and how I treat people and how I walk away from them, or that I allow them grace in whatever they're going through, difficulties they're going through.
Well, I think one cool thing that happens when you learn this principle of like, there's not a whole lot else that matters other than love and kindness and empathy, right? Is you learn how to like give feedback and correction in a loving, empathetic way, because you can do that. I think that's something that we've lost in society overall, because people think like empathy means that I can't give you constructive feedback or be like, hey, you probably shouldn't, you know what I mean? If something really happens where we need to address things, you probably shouldn't have done that. And you can do that in an empathetic way.
Mm-hmm. That, or just, you don't even have to say anything. You can just allow them, get rid of the judgment,
Yeah.
Look at people that have addictions, and that means everybody. We all have addictions,
we do.
Whether somebody's addiction is binging, on Netflix or
shopping,
gaming or shopping, we all have different addictions. And so for us to look at somebody and say, oh, they're on drugs, or they're bad, or they're an alcoholic, or they're a porn addict, okay, or they binge on Netflix, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Give them grace, because they are just trying to fill a hole.
Right.
And we don't know what that hole was from.
Right.
And if we can look at people less judgmental, with more of an understanding, and say, they're hurting.
Yeah.
How can I just say something nice?
Yeah. I think you're totally right. I think you're right. I think because you said that too, some things don't even need it. Some things are like, well, whatever. We don't need it. It doesn't matter.
Right. It just doesn't matter.
It just doesn't matter. And you know what? It's so good. And the other thing you said, with addictions, like, I think Russell Brand, I read his book, Recovery. And he said that, people who are addicted, he wrote this in his book. He was like, people who are addicted to crack or heroin or things like that. He's like, I feel like those guys are the lucky ones, because you can see it, and they can get help, and it's it's really rapid how quickly they decline. But he's like, I had a food addiction. Russell did. He's like, I had these other ones that like no one ever saw, and those lasted longer than my other ones.
Exactly.
And he's like, and I had to get over those, and no one knew.
Right. And no one probably could give him compassion or empathy, right? Because they didn't see it, or they didn't know.
Yeah.
Well, just get over it.
Exactly. And then we do these things where we're like, I've always thought this is interesting. We like rate sins or like addictions or something. Like we rate them like, must be worse than that. Like I don't binge on Netflix. I only binge on Netflix. I don't do heroin. Like, well, it's the same thing. You know what I mean? Like,
however, you're checking out from reality. Right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that, never watch another movie
again,
right?
Sure.
But it's all about moderation. And do you really want to be so checked out from reality that you're not putting your daughter to bed?
Yeah.
Because you're checked out.
Right. It's mindfulness.
Yes,
being aware of what's going on.
Exactly. And that's the saddest thing, is when we choose to use something to hide from reality. And it can happen in grief. I mean, you can try to cover up your grief by doing those things.
Doing a lot of other things. That's intense. Well, I think the message is a beautiful one. I think a lot of people need to hear, especially today. Just like you said, like there's a lot of people who won't reach out at all because they feel like they might be a burden, or maybe they're just scared because of what's going on. You know what I mean? So how do you approach those people you want to get out there, you want to see them. I mean, what's your advice to people?
So this is what I say: if you can be open and honest, and the more truthful and open I've been about my son's death, the freer I feel. Right? We think, oh, I don't want to tell the truth about who I really am or what I'm going through because people will judge me. But it's exactly the opposite. Because when we talk about how we feel, how things are going, what's going on, that allows other people to feel that they can be authentic with us as well.
Yeah.
And as I've talked more and more, people have come to me and they've shared how they really are feeling and how they are struggling. And so just be willing to be authentic, to get rid of the filters, get rid of the, here's my happy life.
Yeah.
Honestly, this baloney.
Right. Well, and you know what? A lot of people, I learned this too kind of early on. A lot of people, that authenticity thing is a tricky one for them, because a lot of people believe, at least in my experience, a lot of people believe that authenticity means like that you can't change. Like if today I do something or say something and tomorrow I change my mind, you weren't authentic. And it's like, well, I am though, because I'm ready to change. You know what I mean?
And another thing that brought up is like before I would think, as an entrepreneur or a coach or whatever, you have to put this facade up. Oh, I'm perfect. And I have this. And it was so funny because I remember about 2 years ago, I was doing some coaching, standing up in front of people. And the owner of the business who was running, I was being a consultant for them. She said, Lark, if you would actually, let down the facade and really let people know who you are, they might connect with you better. Like you might actually, people might like you.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
And I'm like, yeah, you're right, because we think that we have to have, I've got it all together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And none of us have it all together.
Well, none of us do. And I think you're right that's changed a lot, because now if you see somebody who's like that, you're like, something's not right. Now we think like Enron or something, like it's too good to be true, man. Like this doesn't happen normally, like, and so people will run away from, at least I do, if I feel like someone's like shows me they're a little too perfect, I'm like, because I'm also very pragmatic. And one of those things is like, if it sounds too good to be true, it is too good to be true.
Exactly. And let's just be honest with our different struggles and what we're going through. And then other people can feel like, hey, I can share with you, or we can improve. Right.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, and I guess I can ask you this too, but like, I feel like a lot of people struggle with that because they feel like people have to fix things, right? And that would be my question is why do you think it's so hard for people to do that? Like to be authentic, you know what I mean?
Pride.
Yeah,
and just feeling like, I have to have all the answers. Well, no, you don't have to have all the answers, right?
Right.
And it's just a facade, and it's okay to be human. It's
Yeah.
okay to feel. It's okay to have weaknesses. It's okay.
Yeah, well, I think now in those days, like I'm in sales a lot. And so one of my point of references for why I still tell people like, I don't know, or like I made a mistake, is because I learned in sales, like when I started doing that, when I would be up front with a client, when I'd be like, hey, look, I totally screwed this up, and I'm going to try to make it right as best I can. And if it works, sweet. And if I messed up too bad and I lose your business, then that's something I got to deal with. And I found like when I do that, people are like, oh, you know what? It's all right, dude. Like, just
rather
help me
than
out,
trying to cover it up.
Cover it up and keep the facade like I never made a mistake.
Yep.
What are you talking about?
Well, plus I'm sure they felt like, oh, I can trust this guy because he's coming in and he's telling me where he's struggling or where he's having weaknesses. Oh, I can trust him that he's going to make it right as best he can, or he's going to tell me in the future if there are problems.
Right. And I think that is, you're right though. And that's with all our relationships. People, you go up to people, you're just honest with them. Like, hey, I'm not having the best day of it or whatever, you know what I mean? But I think a lot of people struggle with authenticity too, because they feel like if I tell you something like, hey, how are you doing? My day's actually not going really good, but I'm here for you. Like, what can I do to help you? Like they have to fix my bad day. And like, that's not your problem. You just asked me how I was doing.
And being authentic doesn't mean that, hey, let me open the kimono and show you every little sin or whatever.
Right.
No, it's just like, hey, today it's a hard day for me, but I'm doing what I can. Or, I made a mistake at work, but I'm working on it. It'll be okay.
Yeah. You don't have to open up everything. Well, and I've learned the response to that too is like, all right, man, well, I'm here, if you need to talk,
That's
but
right.
let's go.
That's right. That's right.
And maybe you're
not.
gonna.
Yeah, you're not there to fix them, or you can't save them or anything. But you're just there, and you're just walking alongside.
Yeah. Have you seen that video? Everybody's seen it, but it's not about the nail video.
Yes.
I love that video. I actually showed that to a group of kids one time, and I was like, because I was teaching about just working in. I was like just working in life. Like there were a bunch of kids in high school, and that's one of the hardest times of life, especially for a youth. Your body's changing, your emotions are changing. Yeah, you're awkward. So like, how do you do this, right? And I showed this video, and a lot of the kids were like, "Oh, that makes a lot of sense." I was like, I hope you learned something from it, because it's so important to be nice. Just be nice.
Right. Right.
Gosh,
it doesn't
man.
cost you a lot to be nice, right?
Yeah.
And it just and you can change a world by being nice.
And you've written the book, and who was the book targeted for? Was it targeted more for adults? Was it for children? Was it for anybody?
It's two groups actually.
Okay.
One is to parents who are struggling in their relationships with their child.
Interesting.
I wish I could say my relationship with my son was perfect, and we were so close, and we bonded, and we shared, and we didn't. We struggled every day. And yet I look back and I think those struggles are what helped me be a better person, and to be more empathetic and patient and loving and kind. And so to parents who struggle with their children, some things that I have learned, some regrets that I had, and what I now do differently in my parenting. The other group is to those who maybe have lost a loved one, who are struggling to go on. When we lost our son a few months after my husband was just struggling, he needed to go to a therapist, and he was there for several months, and the therapist gave him this book that he read, and at the end he said, "That was the stupidest book I've ever read." And I'm like, well, I'm thinking to myself, how is that possible? The therapist recommended this.
Right.
He goes, "It was so sad." And so I said, "Let me have the book. I need to see this." So I skimmed through it, and it was a pastor who was putting together all of these stories about loss and death from experiences he had had with people in the hospital. And I said to my husband, I'm like, "You're right. This is the most depressing book." There was nothing about hope or that you can go on, or nothing about letting these people who had experienced a great loss know that there was something worth living for. And I had sort of toyed with the idea that I was going to write a book at that point, but I said, I decided my book is going to have hope, and my book is going to offer people ways to move forward, right? Which is what I felt was missing. And it's a decision. You need to choose to do that. But there are specific things that we can do that will move us forward. For me, it was finding a purpose bigger than myself that would help me be able to help others and move forward and help them.
Wow. Yeah, I think a lot of people, I think hope is a big one, right? And so how do you, I haven't read the book yet, but I will, I promise. But how do you define hope?
That what I'm doing has the chance to save lives and a chance to change lives. And honestly, my thought when I first started was, if I can prevent one other parent from going through what my husband and I have had to go through, I will have changed the world.
Yeah.
And in the back of the book, I put a few responses that I've had from people as I've shared my story, how it has affected and changed their lives. And I know that just in the short time that I've been able to share my story, already it has changed people's decision about staying on the planet, that they're not going to end their lives.
Wow.
And
that's powerful.
I just think that's one person that I've touched, and who are they going to then touch?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because you never know what happens after that, right? Mm-hmm. You never know what happens after you change one person's life. Because just like this, right? It's about saving lives, and it's about the one life that you can save that goes on and makes a difference, and everything like that. And I think that's a perfect definition of hope. That there's something out there worth living for.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And I think it just reiterates that we are all connected.
Yeah.
We're not isolated. We cannot carry on by ourselves. We need each other.
Yeah.
And that's what it comes down to, is we just need each other.
Yeah. So you're promoting the book now. When does it officially
releases November 10th, which is just a couple weeks away.
That's cool.
And you can find it on Amazon. And
that's really cool.
I'm really excited because it's a message of hope and a message that even in the loss, we can find some meaning and we can move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think so. The book is here, and I think it's going to be a hit. I mean, I can't wait to read it. I'm gonna dive in because I love that. I also love the fact that we can go find local authors and who've done this stuff and they write about their own experiences. I feel like, to me, I can read books like, I mean, obviously I read lots of books and I appreciate the books from the big guys, but there's always something really special about just like the local
somebody
authors
that you've met and you know their story and you know that the struggle is real. Yeah,
and this is cool. And it's just very inspiring to me that because people think like, well, let me ask you, when you were going to become an author, when it was going to be real, like I'm going to write a book, I'm going to do this. Like what was your thought process going through this? Like, did you ever think like these big guys, how am I supposed to write a book like Tony Robbins or like Brene Brown or something like that?
Exactly. Because my hope was that it would affect tens of thousands of lives, right?
Yeah.
But I'm like, my thought was if I can just share the story with my neighbors, because our neighbors were so kind and helpful to us making it through this difficult time. So I thought if I can just share the story with the neighbors and then my friends and as it kind of grew from there, people were like, I want to read your story. I'd do the podcast and people were like, well, I want to read it too. And I'm like, okay. I just am so grateful. Each step of the way I've had help, like I mentioned, Richard Paul Evans or the other awesome people, the editors who have come and helped. And just at every step, there's been someone to help me with that process and to move forward. And I feel like it's a message that needs to be shared, and people want to hear it. They want to know that there's hope. And so many people have helped me, said this message will change lives. Just in their reading it, said, I love this story. I know it's going to change lives.
Yeah, well, that's obvious, and I think it's great. And I think for other people, I think this touches lives, and why I love talking to business owners and authors and local people, right? Because it just helps people realize like that, hey, that if, I can share my story too, and it doesn't take away from anybody. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like I can write a book and I can help people and we all like come together. You know what I mean?
That's right.
I love it. I absolutely love the culture that surrounds like mom and pop shops, local businesses, small businesses, because it's just like this unity that I don't feel like you get anywhere else. Like we all try to support each other.
Exactly. And that's the way I feel. If there's somebody selling something that I know you and you're selling something,
yeah,
I want to buy it from you, right?
Yeah.
Because I want you to prosper and do well.
Right. Well, and when we do that, like things just really come back. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I like when you write a book and you help people, when you start a business and you help people, when you don't do any of that and you help people, right? Like just giving just works.
Exactly.
Man.
And like with the book, this is not something, you don't write a book because you think, I'm going to be a millionaire from my book. That's just let you right now. That's not the way it is. That's not why you should write a book. Well, and it's usually not. You usually don't do that. Yeah. Exactly. You're usually in the hole when you write a book, right? And the whole point being is like, do you have a message to share that's going to change lives?
Yeah.
And that's and that's another thing I've learned. Before it was always about the profit.
Yeah.
And now it's like the profit is that I have helped you become a better person and to choose to share your gifts with other people. That's what is different about me now. It's not, how much money am I going to earn from this? It's how have I changed lives?
Yeah, it's not about ROI. It's just about helping people.
It is. And I'm fortunate that I'm in a position in my life where I can dedicate time to this project.
Yeah, which is amazing. Which is, it's just one of those things where you listen and you're like, man, like everything came together so that you could write this book and help other people.
Exactly.
And that's a good thing, and is that how you view the book? Is that how you view your process so far?
It is, and I just love it. And I make myself available so that I can go share this message, on
cool.
podcasts or in speeches or wherever. I'm just happy to share.
Well, yeah. And people find a lot of comfort, especially people who, and that's why I love having so many different kinds of people on my podcast, because when you find the one person who you look up to, who you see up there and you're like, I'm listening to Lark on a podcast, she's in my same spot. She's doing the things that I'm doing, and she looks like me. She acts like me, and that means I can do something. You know what I mean? I have a little bit of inspiration, you know?
Exactly.
And I think that's awesome. So, so your book launches November 10th.
November 10th. You can find it on my website, which is larkdeangalley.com. If you want to get alerts and updates there, and eventually the link to where you can buy it,
Cool.
or it's going to be on Amazon as well.
And your website, is that where people can go if they find you and they want to explore business coaching or maybe get involved in any other way?
Right. Just, you can find me there with my email address and
Cool.
how to reach out if you want me to come and talk to your group.
Cool.
I just love to share, and my message is that you matter, and you have a message that needs to be shared with someone else, and they need you.
Wow. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for the book. Thanks for coming on and talking about this. And before I go though, I like to ask this question sometimes, but is there anything we didn't talk about that you wanted to talk about? Any message you wanted to get out there that I missed?
I think that's it.
I think we got it.
I'm so happy. Thank you for letting me share.
Oh, no, thank you. It was a pleasure.